All right, everybody, welcome in to another episode of the NFL Seekers podcast. Today, we're coming at you with our top 10 fantasy football wide receiver rankings, PPR rankings. Took a week off to kind of study up on these receivers, get our rankings right, get as much information as we could to get these rankings gathered. Stores buddy, how are you? How has the last week or so treated you?
Sweating my ass off over here, Dan. It's absolutely been 100 plus degrees. It's crazy. If you hear like a jet sound coming from around me, it's the HVAC. It sounds like an absolute airplane taking off. So, other than that, I'm doing good. We've kind of had a little summer break. Our summer break consists of just us going to work every day. So sorry for the inconsistency on the pods. But me and Dan, we're grinding. We're gonna be spitting these things out. But side tangent, Dan, how are you doing?
Yeah, our little post-draft vacation, if you will. But I'm doing good, just the same as you, just working hot as ever. My fan isn't too hot right now or too strong right now because I don't want to mess up the audio. So I'm burning alive over here. So I'm ready to get into these rankings. Let's just get right into our number 10 receiver, and that is Mr. Davante Adams for the Vegas Raiders. He's a consensus ADP wide receiver 12 right now. He's our NFL Seekers wide receiver 10, my wide receiver 10, Stores' wide receiver 10. 32 years old, going into a season with Aiden O'Connell likely the quarterback for the Raiders. Apparently, that was the rumor right now going around camp is that AOC is going to be the quarterback. So 15.6 points per game last year for Davante Adams. How do you think it goes this year, being drafted around the end of round two?
I think he's good value, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, because I mean, every year, yeah, I feel like he is a little bit slept on. He doesn't get that top five wide receiver buzz, but Devontae Adams is just a level of consistency, man. I mean, if we're going off of target share and everything percentage, I mean, air yards, Devontae Adams was 45% in air yards share, and he was a league leading 33% target share last year, even with inconsistent quarterback play. So, I mean, he gets his own. I mean, he's kind of quarterback proof. He kind of has proven that, like DeAndre Hopkins in the past has always been quarterback proof. It doesn't matter. But Davante Adams is going to get his. I mean, we're talking about a guy since 2020 has not had less than 150 targets. And he's coming off of another 103 reception season to go along with 1,100 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. But I mean, that's what you're going to get from Davante Adams. His game is kind of time proof, it's endless. He is a route running master. So he's going to get open and he's going to get targets, even with a bad quarterback. But where we're going to see his fall off is touchdowns. That does scare me. Ever since he has gone to Vegas, it has slowly decreased, and his quarterback play is probably the reason for that. But if we're talking about half PPR, he is kind of, he's bulletproof in that sense because he's going to get his shares and he's going to get enough catches to produce at a high level.
Yeah, I hate to just kind of have a lame analysis, but I think he will be the exact same as last year. It is a similar situation. You kind of have the same quarterback out there as well, but I do think Brock Bowers will help him. I think that's another focal point that defenses will have to focus on. Brock Bowers is just a freak receiver. He's kind of their wide receiver too as a rookie. So I'm excited for the addition of him, and it will help Adams. I think he will literally just finish right where he did last year. He had 265 points last year. That's very respectable. Finishes the wide receiver 10. No coincidence. We have him as a wide receiver 10. Half PPR actually does have him as the ADP wide receiver 10, and in full PPR is the ADP 12. So he's just right around there. I think it's a good sweet spot. I think everyone we have ahead of him is pretty appropriate. So I do really just think it's a fair ranking, not really too much analysis to give. I think he has right around 1,200 yards like he did last year, had 8 touchdowns last year. I see that being like 6 or 7 this year. So pretty much the same season. The upside isn't the craziest, but where he's going, I don't mind it. I will say I do like the running backs where he's going. Like I find myself personally taking Saquon or Jonathan Taylor over him, but if you want a receiver there, I can't fault you for this tried and tested battle-proof receiver.
100%. And you know what? I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with Devontae Adams, and he's the old relic car. Can we move on to our fancy Ferrari, Dan, our brand new 2024 Ferrari?
Yeah, I couldn't get any more polar opposite. I didn't even think about that. It's pretty hilarious. But our wide receiver nine is Marvin Harrison Jr. He is being drafted as the consensus wide receiver nine. So we're right on ADP with him. I have him as my wide receiver nine, Stores as him as wide receiver eight. And yeah, we're split between the two Ohio State studs. Spoiler alert, we have Garrett Wilson at eight, and we kind of just have him flipped between the two of us. So I'll let you talk about Marvin first. You're a little bit higher than me, and I mean that's the best receiver prospect of all time. I think we both can agree on that one.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean, we are going off of the best wide receiver prospect of all time. And he goes into an offense where he's clearly the wide receiver one. I think the next person with the most target shares behind him is going to be Trey McBride, who's going to, possibly steal some of that target share. But I mean, similar to what Davante Adams is getting, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Marvin Harrison immediately steps in and gets a 30% target share in that offense. Kyler Murray, he's got a capable quarterback. This guy is a freak athlete. He's got all the tools. He did it in college. His, Hall of Fame dad. I don't see why it can't translate to the NFL just immediately and flawlessly. But yeah, I mean, I'm expecting 100 plus receptions from Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think that's far fetched. I think the target share is going to be plentiful there in Arizona, and I wouldn't even be. I mean, I'll throw it out there as a bold prediction. I think he scores 10 plus touchdowns too.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far outside of the realm of possibility. You'd said 100 receptions, 10 touchdowns. I would, that's definitely a ceiling. He has that ceiling. He could have that type of season. Then next year he'll be a top three pick in fantasy. So I could definitely see that range of outcomes with Marvin. I have him like 90 catches, 7 to 10 touchdowns. So right there, he's a freak, man. I love the prospect out of Ohio State. He really is the best receiver I've ever watched. Just insane body control, insane route running for how big he is, insane fluidity and movement. He's a freak. He has the best ball tracking I've seen too. Like he just comes down with anything. It's my ball mentality and just plucks it from anyone. So I love Marvin Harrison, the player. Don't need to talk about that too much. The situation's awesome as well. We love Kyler. The back shoulder fade connection is going to be really beautiful, honestly. I think the discussion needs to be so Marvin is the highest drafted rookie receiver ever in fantasy football by a large, large margin. He's going early round two. Some drafts he'll go round one even because receivers are just going so high off the board. So I guess the discussion really is: are you comfortable taking him where he is? I'm sure you are, as you're one spot higher than ADP. But yeah, I think that is really the main discussion here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no hesitation with Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, I wouldn't even, to be honest with you. What is his current draft position? Do you have it pulled up? Sorry, I don't.
Let me see. Overall, he's being drafted in redraft leagues as the 14th overall pick, right behind Drake London, which is pretty good value, but also right behind Jahmyr Gibbs and right in front of Jonathan Taylor and Olave.
Yeah, I personally have him in that. I mean, ceiling for me is that 10 to 14 range. It really is. I think I'd go as high as 10 and feel comfortable with drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. because I feel like the ceiling is so high with him. And I think he's just going to burst onto the scenes. Ohio State is wide receiver you clearly. And what prospect from Ohio State recently hasn't absolutely just, gone into the NFL, incredible. I mean, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. I mean, it's just this tree farm of wide receivers with immediate success coming out of Ohio State, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is better than all of them.
Yeah, he was the best in that famous room. And yeah, with Marvin, you're gonna have to call your shot. He's going higher than any rookie receiver has ever been. And everything is priced into how good he is, how his draft capital, his situation. It's all really perfect. It really is. It couldn't be a better situation for this guy to be a Hall of Famer, just like his father. So with that, let's just move on to the other Ohio State guy we're talking about here in this discussion. Garrett Wilson, we had the two Ohio State guys flipped. He's my wide receiver eight, Stores' wide receiver nine. He's a consensus wide receiver eight, the Seekers wide receiver eight. He had 12.5 points per game last year, and I think it's just a hilarious projection and discussion because you're going from the worst quarterback in the NFL to Aaron Rodgers. So it's a fun projection for Garrett Wilson. The sky really is the limit. I thought he should have gone first overall in his draft. I think the Jaguars are tripping with that Trayvon Walker pick, aged pretty well, I would say. And Garrett is just a beast. He can be alpha wide receiver one. And I think the funnest part really is just the projection, just knowing that you have Aaron Rodgers coming into this offense, and he was still, somewhat startable last year with a maybe not even a top 50 NFL quarterback on his team throwing to him. So I think the sky's the limit. He's going to have a huge boost. Easy to project the boost. The talent is there. He's going to have a lot more touchdowns than he really has his whole career with Aaron Rodgers throwing to him. So as long as that guy stays healthy, as long as both of them stay healthy, I think the sky is the limit for Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, positive progression for Garrett Wilson. I mean, in the wise words of Tyler Huntley once said to the former Jets quarterback, he's so poo-poo. Um, so
They so poo-poo.
you go from that to Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers, and you've seen what Aaron Rodgers has produced with his wide receiver ones dating back to Jordy Nelson and Greg Jennings, and most recently come to mind obviously Davante Adams and the seasons that they were able to have. I mean, Davante Adams was putting up 18 touchdowns in some of those seasons, so you know I don't see much difference in the game of Garrett Wilson. I'd say, he started off his career with more of a bang than Davante Adams. So I think he has that floor to be as good of as a Davante Adams and has that ceiling. So, he incredibly enough, with the terrible quarterback play in the last 2 years, he still obviously was fed targets with 147 targets in 2022 and 168 last year, coming along with 83 receptions and 93 receptions, over 1,000 yards in both of his first 2 seasons, and then it's his touchdowns right there at 4 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, just hit the over, man. Hit the
The
over on.
touchdowns are where that's why I laugh when I say the projection's just comical because he had 3 touchdowns last year. Like you could
Yeah.
easily project that at like 9 or 10, and it's just hilarious to me.
Oh yeah, Aaron Rodgers is absolutely gonna feed him. He's gonna be incredible. So I mean, and again, I have him at 9, you have him at 8. I think the value there is perfect. I mean, the ceiling of this guy could be wide receiver one. It really could be with Aaron Rodgers, given bearing Aaron Rodgers' health all season. I mean, the ceiling is tremendous. So if you have the balls to take him top 5 wide receiver above, it could tremendously pay off.
Yeah, I think his ADP is definitely appropriate. It will pay off. And it is funny because Marvin Harrison, your whole discussion for Marvin Harrison is exactly how I feel for Garrett Wilson. And we just have him exactly flipped. Like I see 100 catches, 10 plus touchdowns for Garrett Wilson. I really do. And if not, it'll be right below that. They'll both finish right next to each other. And I think they both have wide receiver one upside in the perfect situation where Rodgers stays healthy all year. I think the Cardinals offense could be awesome. I think the Jets offense especially could be really awesome with the offensive line kind of being set now, and they really attacked the offense this offseason. So really excited for the Jets. Anything else you want to say on either of the Ohio State guys before we move on?
Incredible players. Couldn't be more excited to watch them this year.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll go to our wide receiver 7, someone I really love, AJ Brown. He's the consensus wide receiver 7 in ADP. My wide receiver 6, Stores wide receiver 7, and the NFL Seekers wide receiver 7. 17 points per game last year, just an absolute stud freak. You throw it up to AJ Brown, he'll come down with it 80% of the time. He's awesome. He brings you those really big spike weeks. He's really nice to have on your team. I personally have him ranked above Puka. I feel like a lot of these discussions will kind of be a, he or him type of discussion, like Puka versus AJ Brown or Garrett Wilson versus Marvin Harrison, just because they're really just being drafted next to each other and kind of got to call your shot on them. So I do have AJ Brown just one spot above Puka. I think he'll be slightly more of a focal point in that Eagles offense. I just think that he's kind of a drama queen. If he doesn't get those targets, he will make sure he gets those targets. Where Puka, I think, is a little bit less of an alpha. I think he might be okay taking a backseat to Cup some weeks, letting Cup, be that guy. But I don't think AJ Brown would ever let that happen. So yeah, I do think that translates to fantasy projection or production. And if you look at like any of the betting player props right now, Brown is projected at 200 more yards and 2 more touchdowns than Puka by Vegas. So I do kind of value that. Vegas isn't in the business of losing money. So I do really, use those for tiebreakers in my rankings. And I do love AJ Brown. Just the player's a stud, a freak. You look at him, he's scary. Just he's gonna moss you. And yeah, I just love the player.
He's built different. That's for sure. I mean, his physical stature and the specimen he is just different, man. And I mean, AJ Brown's, I mean, I feel like people feel like he's just been a vet for a long time. He's actually a fairly young player. I mean, he's been in the NFL for 5 years, but he's only 26 years old. So, I mean, he's just really hitting his prime right now. And like you said, what did the points per game average out for AJ Brown last year?
He had 17 points per game.
Yeah, that's what you like to see from your alpha wide receiver one right there. And like you said, he is a diva. He demands targets. He's gonna have those big boom weeks because he is a vertical, a vertical threat. He gets down the field. He is aggressive at the point of attack, and he scores those 80, 70, 60-yard touchdowns consistently on a week in, week out basis. So you know what you're getting out of AJ Brown. You're getting 100 receptions. You're getting, a guaranteed 7, 8 plus touchdowns, and he will demand the ball. And in this new Kellen Moore led offense, I think they will be throwing the ball a lot, so which I'm very excited about. And yeah, I mean, the prospect is, for the fantasy prospect is just, incredible. He is the wide receiver one. He is just now hitting his prime. He has a good quarterback throwing to him. He is in a good offense. The offensive line's there. They can get the ball out. He can run those deep routes. And like I said, the most valuable thing about AJ Brown for me is he will have those boom weeks consistently to where it wins you those, those crucial games when you really just need somebody to pop off.
Absolutely. Those boom weeks really do pay off. It's kind of interesting. Fantasy Pros and ESPN both project him to get exactly 270 points, exactly 93 receptions, a little over 1,300 yards. I agree with you. I think he has over 100 receptions again. I think he has 105-ish again, what he had last year. And yeah, I think not to be boring, but it will kind of be similar as last year. It's similar offense, except for you bring in Saquon, and that will only help the overall offense, help them go into the end zone more, red zone more, and get AJ Brown those red zone targets that are so valuable. So I do love AJ Brown, just love the player himself. So I'm going to really value what he's shown me over the years, the production right now, the 17 points per game. Really just love AJ Brown. But with that, do you want to go on to your wide receiver six?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
And something real quick, it did just update. He is the consensus ADP wide receiver six now, AJ Brown. So I guess if we
Oh,
did update our rankings, he would be our wide receiver six due to tiebreakers. So there is that. But we'll go to our wide receiver six, Puka Nacua, the GOAT. He broke every single rookie receiving record you could possibly think of, including his first ever playoff game. He broke all the playoff rookie records. The guy's a freak. Our wide receiver six, Puka Nacua, the consensus wide receiver six, although he just barely moved down to wide receiver seven, apparently, even though it fluctuates so much. My wide receiver seven, Stores' ADP, or sorry, Stores' wide receiver six. He had 17.6 points per game last year, a league winning 17.6 points per game as a rookie. We all know he was just an absolute monster. It didn't make any sense, but I'll let you talk about it first.
just think about this, everyone. Picture Cooper Cup in his prime. That's what you got with Puka Nacua for the next 5 years, man. It's inspirational stuff. I mean, this guy, I mean, I hate to say it, but it is. He wants it more. It's his heart, man. He's gonna go out there and he's gonna produce and he's gonna put up. And I mean, what he did last year was just incredible. It didn't matter when Cooper Cup came back because Puka Nacua is the alpha wide receiver in this wide receiving room. And Matthew Stafford, again, he has produced legendary seasons with Calvin Johnsons, with Cooper Cups, so he's gonna hyper feed Puka Nacua, and I think we're gonna just see similar production. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Puka Nacua's touchdowns go up. I mean, that he only scored 6 last year, so I think we're in for some positive progression there. But I could see the 100 plus receptions again. I could see the 160 targets. I can see the 12, 13, 1,400 receiving yards. And, he's going into year 2. He's only going to be more comfortable. He's only going to be better. And he's still, I like that it's that 1-2 punch with Cooper Cup, because Cooper Cup does, require defenses to pay attention to him, which I think just only benefits Puka Nacua.
Absolutely. And when you do look at Fantasy Pros and ESPN's projections for him, he had 6 touchdowns last year. They both project him at 6 touchdowns this year. So, ESPN projects him to have 40 less points than he had last year. I think he'll be a little bit, less productive than last year, but I don't think it'll be 40 points worth of, less production. So I do think that he is a little bit of a value, a little bit being slept on production wise in these props. And Yeah, I guess I'll go on the devil's advocate side. Why have AJ Brown one spot higher? I do see a world where Cooper Kupp just wasn't healthy at all last year, and I could see him, wanting to be a little bit more of a focal point this year. So that is something that kind of sticks with me. Matthew Stafford's an absolute stud. I thought he was a top five quarterback in the NFL last year. So that is really just something special when you have Puka Nacua, someone as smart as him and someone as smart as Stafford. That connection is really, truly special as long as Stafford stays healthy. It is just that it's a perfect word to describe it, special. So I understand you having him at 6. It's really hard. You just flip flop him really, but yeah, I feel like we didn't really I didn't plead my case too well for AJ Brown over Puka Nacua, but at the same time, I mean, they're both insane. Puka just came off the best rookie season ever, so hard to argue against him. But you kind of know regression has to be coming, surely, unless he's just the literal goat.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know I get that devil's advocate part because I mean it is interesting. Cooper Cup did not seem right. He really like fell off a cliff when he came back. But I mean, again, one last thing with Puka Nacua. Again, he's in for those boom weeks. He had 4 games with over 150 yards, and so you are going to get those boom weeks from Puka Nacua, which I do like as well.
Absolutely. That's something massive, something you want to target. And with that, speaking of boom weeks, let's go to this absolute stud. We thought Puka's 17.6 points per game was awesome. Amon-Ra St. Brown in 2023 with 20.7 points per game. That is absurd. That's Christian McCaffrey type numbers that he put up. So our wide receiver five stores as wide receiver five, my wide receiver five, the consensus ADP wide receiver five, last year's wide receiver 3. I think there's some value here. If you're in a PPR league, a full point PPR league, I think I'm putting him over Justin Jefferson. I'm just going to be honest. I think I'm tweaking my rankings here on the spot, specifically for a full point PPR league. I will put Amon-Ra over Justin Jefferson as my number 4 receiver because I really do think he's just so special. That 20.7 points per game, it's pretty consistent as well. He'll have like 3 dud weeks throughout the season, but he's consistently relentless with the targets. He brings in crazy amount of targets, 164 last year, 119 catches. I see that being right around 150 plus targets this year, 110 plus catches. I don't see why it wouldn't with Ben Johnson coming back, with that offense remaining the same, except for they lost Josh Reynolds. So I think Amon-Ra is going to be awesome. He's going to be another focal point of the offense again. And I'm really excited, man. I think he has 110 plus receptions and almost 10 plus touchdowns and maybe 1,300 yards. It's really exciting for him.
This is sorry. I mean, this is these wide receivers are going to be fun this year, man. It's a wide receiver league. It's a passing league, but I mean, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Dan, he played in 16 games last year. In those 16 games, 13 games he had 8 plus receptions in them. So that's you love to see it. You're getting a guaranteed, and most of those games it was above 8. So just 8 plus receptions. I mean, some of those games were 15, 11, 9, 12. And so one was, I think he had like an 18 reception game, if I'm not mistaken. But out of his 16 games, 13 of them were 8 plus receptions. So PPR, absolute master. That offense is not slowing down. Ben Johnson is the GOAT. He's the offensive coordinator of the year every year. Jared Goff is playing lights out football, and this whole Lions offense is just clicking. And it's going to do the exact same thing. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I lock those same numbers back in, man. I see 119 receptions. I see 1,500 yards. I see 10 touchdowns. It's just he's going to be so solid. He is a consistent, tough football player. He's going to be out there for almost every single game. Each season, 17 games played, 16 games played, 16 games played. He is just rock solid. 2 straight seasons of 1,000 plus receiving yards. And then, yeah, he's going to score touchdowns too, man. You get everything that Amon-Ra St. Brown is just upside. He's going to produce in every single stat category.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. He had over 10 receptions in more games than not last year, or sorry, over 10 targets in more games than not last year. I mean, that's just insane. He's going to get the targets. And I was kind of being disrespectful. I said he might have 2 or 3 dud games like he did last year. No, he only had 1 game under 10 points the entire season. Only 1 game under 12 points. That was the second worst game, was 12.9 points. So that's just insane. Yeah, what was his third worst game? His third worst game was 16 points. Like, I mean, he's or 14.2, I guess, and then 16. He's just insane. Consistently insane. He'll get you 20 more often than not. He's kind of like a Christian McCaffrey as a receiver because he's such a focal point of that offense. He's such a PPR reception merchant, and he's being drafted as the sixth overall pick right now in redraft. So, it's Christian McCaffrey at one and then five receivers off the board. That's how it's going. So you're gonna have to have a high premium pick to take him. But if he's there on the board for you in the first round, I think he's a smash pick. Honestly, anywhere behind pick three, I'm fine. Maybe two, I'm fine taking Amon-Ra because he's really that type of talent.
9 games, Danny, with over 100 receiving yards. In the first 4 games, he scored a touchdown in every single one of them. So it's all there, man. It's all there. It's clicking for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And again, I mean, not a very bold take, but he could be wide receiver one. It's not far fetched. I mean, any of these guys, like we've been talking about in the top 10, have that upside to be wide receiver one. It's just an Amon-Ra St. Brown, out of this whole group. I mean, it may be one of the most clear wide receiver one roles for me. I mean, or the one wide receiver one in fantasy outlook for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of how this year is in the first round of fantasy. You're just calling your shot on what guy you think can be that actual number one player at his position, whatever position it is. You're really just calling your shot because any of these guys can, all the way down to Marvin Harrison and Davante Adams. So with that, we'll go on to a wide receiver for a really polarizing discussion, probably the farthest apart we've been on any receivers in this episode so far. We really are kind of just locked in on our receiver rankings, super similar, but we'll go on to our wide receiver for Justin Jefferson. He's being drafted as a consensus wide receiver four right now. He's my wide receiver four, the NFL Seekers wide receiver four, but he stores his wide receiver two. Stores absolutely loves him. 20.2 points per game last year. Holds the record for most yards per game as a receiver in NFL history. That's a pretty great stat just to hold. And he's a 100-yard lock every single week. So I'll let you talk about this guy and your number two receiver.
It's Justin Jefferson, man. Best wide receiver in football. He's incredible. I mean, the dude played in 10 games last year. He still put up 1,000 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. He was playing with guys like Jaron Hall, Nick Mullins. I mean, it did not matter. I mean, Justin Jefferson is him. He is, I mean, he's the best wide receiver in football. I mean, he is. He is. He is the best wide receiver in football. What makes him maybe not wide receiver one is his quarterback play. But like you said, the most fantasy points per game in NFL history. He is incredible. He's going to put it up numbers with whoever's throwing to him, whether that's Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy. I don't care. I'm not worried about it. He's going to be that guy. He is Justin Jefferson, and I don't see a decline happening for him because he is that dude. And Kevin O'Connell is a very bright, smart mind, and he knows who his best player is, and he knows how to get him the ball. So I don't see anything changing there.
Absolutely. He's an absolute stud. He's I guess let's just get into that discussion. I personally, I agree with you that he is like technically the best receiver in the NFL. Like he runs the best routes. He's the most complete
Best.
receiver.
I
He's the
couldn't.
most complete receiver. But I would say personally, I think Tyreek Hill's the best player in the
Yeah.
NFL. I'm just gonna say I think he's the best player in the NFL.
Tyreek Hill is probably the most dominant, in my
Yeah, probably
opinion.
like the hardest to game plan for and just hardest to
Yeah.
guard. But like as a receiver, technically,
Yeah.
like Justin Jefferson's already more refined as a route runner than Tyreek Hill and just getting open over the middle of the field. So I definitely it's splitting hairs. I just think the impact that Tyreek Hill. So I wanted to bring that up. But yeah, I do agree. He is technically the best receiver in the NFL. Probably the best receiver we've ever seen. Really, if you want to get into it, it's him and another Viking, Randy Moss. Really, I can't even think anyone else has a better argument with the start that he's gotten off to with his career. So absolutely love him. It really just does come down to the quarterback play and really the offensive talent on his team, pushing him below the other guys for me personally. But yeah, I understand you having him at two. What was he drafted as the first or second overall pick in fantasy drafts last year? So totally understandable. The quarterback play has never really affected him, although Kirk was really nice for him. Kirk really helped his floor. And I thought, if Kirk was still there, I think Justin would probably be my wide receiver one. So I
Yeah.
do think that hurts a little bit, but yeah, he's Justin Jefferson. He will be a lock for 100 yards per week, and his floor is very high still. So yeah, I think it's a great pick. He's being drafted as the fifth overall pick right now. So Yeah, you pretty much are deciding between like Amon-Ra or the first running backs or the second and third running back in Bijan and Brees. But yeah, I think, if you take him over those guys, you can't be faulted at all. It's Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of like you just off tangent, yeah, like he is the most complete wide receiver. We're talking about, if you're, I don't know, it is hard though. I mean, it is hard because Tyreek Hill is just so dominant and he brings a different aspect to football that no one else can really or ever has brought, which is just blazing speed and hands to go along with that because you just when you have a guy that runs a 4-0, they never have good hands. And Tyreek Hill is like the first to really ever do that. And then honestly, the next best is Jalen Waddle at that. But Tyreek Hill is just far and above probably the most dominant and the most lethal football player that can just take over a game. But totally side tangent. That's for another day. That's another discussion. We could go on for probably hours debating that. But yeah, Justin Jefferson, man, don't sleep on him this year. Draft him. Draft him. I mean, I don't care. I don't care where you draft him. I don't even care if you draft him number one overall. It is bold to take him number one overall given the quarterback play, but at the end of the day, you got to realize who the wide receiver is.
But number one overall in our league last year.
It's the curse. It's a curse of the consensus wide receiver one or player number one is always a curse. Whether it's dating back to David Johnson getting hurt, Christian McCaffrey, the years that he went number one a lot. It's just Antonio. I mean, it goes on. It goes on and on. It's a weird phenomenon. It's a weird curse. It's like the Madden curse.
Yeah, hopefully Christian McCaffrey can break that curse this year because he's a lock to be the number one overall pick in really any draft. I would say personally, maybe some other people feel higher about the receivers. But with that, let's just go on to our wide receiver three, another LSU product. Uh, Jamar Chase, just an absolute stud, such a fun receiver to watch. My wide receiver three, Stores' wide receiver three, the consensus wide receiver three, which I was a little bit surprised on. I was expecting to be high on Jamar Chase. I was expecting consensus to be a little bit higher on Justin Jefferson than Jamar Chase, but I guess nope, everyone's drafting him at three. So I definitely understand it. I think the difference really just comes down to Joe Burrow as your quarterback, and you're betting on offense. Fantasy really is just betting. At the end of the day, you're just betting on these players. So I mean, I'm personally betting on Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense over the Vikings. So I do have him over Justin Jefferson for that reason. Last year, he had 16.4 points per game without Burrow for a lot of the year, obviously. So that is pretty impressive. He did have some games with Jake Browning where he kind of won fantasy weeks, and people were thinking he was just going to be completely spelled out of fantasy when Burrow did go down with that injury. So I do think that's impressive. Finishes the wide receiver 11 last year. I don't know exactly how many games Burrow missed, but I mean 106 catches or 100 catches last year, 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns without him. I think it's a pretty fun and easy projection for positive progression. And I think he has 30 more, 40 more fantasy points than he did last year. And he was a wide receiver 11. So I think he has an awesome season. I project 10 touchdowns, 110 yards, 1,400 yards, or 110 catches, 1,400 yards. I think he has an awesome season. I think he's so talented. You throw a screen to him, he will take it to the house. He'll make people miss. He'll moss you. He's, in my opinion, he was the best receiver prospect in a long time that I ever evaluated before Marvin Harrison Jr. So love the player. He was even better than Justin Jefferson at college when they were on the same team. So he is a freak. He's got Joe Burrow to him. So I think there's a lot of pluses.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much just said everything. But one thing that I just found interesting is last year without Joe Burrow for majority of the season, was Jamar Chase his first 100 reception season where he got literally 100. But I mean, his target share has been fantastic. 128, 134, 145 targets in the past years. Never had a season under 1,000 yards. Level of consistency with scoring is very good. 13, 9, 7. Obviously, that's where his dip took place when Joe Burrow went out. But yeah, I mean, this is the guy who can score you double-digit touchdowns, who has the upside of 100 receptions, who's going to get targets. And like you said, I mean, this dude runs every route in the book. He can take screens to the house. He can beat you vertically. It's just anywhere on the field, intermediate, short, long. He can beat you there. He's an athletic freak. He's going to make plays, and getting Joe Burrow back is going to be absolutely huge for him.
Absolutely. And I think it's time to go on to our wide receiver too, someone we've already kind of jumped the gun and talking about because he's so fun to talk about. But that is Mr. Tyreek Hill for the Miami Dolphins. He's the consensus wide receiver two. My wide receiver two, Stores is wide receiver 4. He has him and Justin Jefferson swapped. And yeah, 23.5 points per game last year. That is awesome. That was the second best. We'll talk about who had the most soon here in a second. But, he finished as a wide receiver 2 last year, not to be lazy and, again, but I do think he is kind of a similar season, a similar situation this year. He will probably finish as a wide receiver 2 if he stays healthy. And, I do think this is kind of a discussion of a CD versus Tyreek Hill discussion, though, because there are people taking Tyreek over CD, and that is interesting to me. I do think that, um, I don't know. I think the boom weeks are
I don't.
awesome, but at the
I'll
same
I'll be
time,
honest. I
CD's
don't
so
think it's
nice.
any of these top 4 or 5 receivers. I don't. I really don't even think it's bold. I think you just pick your poison because when has the wide receiver one ever finished wide receiver one in back-to-back seasons? It's just picking your poison, and a lot goes into it based on if you go really deep into it, is what matchups are they facing, what corners are they facing week in and week out, what's the secondary, who's got the easier strength of schedule. It all goes into it. And so, to me, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Ceedee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. Pick your poison. I mean, pick your poison. Obviously, we're all going to have our different rankings on them, but you're telling me it's far fetched for any of those 5 to finish as wide receiver 1 because it's really not.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, it really is just calling your shot. And yeah, it is hard to project with Tyreek Hill. He had 376 fantasy points last year, 1,800 yards receiving, 13 touchdowns, 119 catches. So it's pretty safe to say he's going to have a regression. And I don't think it's safe to say that with CeeDee Lamb. So I do think that's kind of another reason I have CeeDee Lamb higher. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I do think there will be a regression, and it will just kind of go down to how much of a regression. ESPN projects him at 8 touchdowns. That's 5 less than last year. That's pretty interesting. They have him less than 300 fantasy points. He had 376 last year. So that is interesting. But yeah, at the end of the day, he's got to be the wide receiver 2. I don't think you can really argue really. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, like you said, it's so interchangeable. It really is. So yeah. Anything else you want to say on Tyreek?
6 games over 150 receiving yards. Boom weeks is Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the wide receiver with the most upside week in and week out, it is Tyreek Hill because he will have those 40, 50 point games. Like he will set fantasy records with 215 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns because he is the most lethal football player ever. I don't think there's a football player that's ever been more dangerous to step on the field of. The defense has to know where he's at all times because he will get behind you. He will get behind the safety who's playing 30 yards off because he is just the biggest burner. He's a player that we've never seen in the NFL. And he is him. I mean, Tyreek Hill is just a different type of football player and the most lethal football player in the NFL. But yeah, it is safe to say, he did turn 30 in March. And so, I don't know. I just feel like a regression is coming. I mean, I don't feel like it's going to be a huge regression, but the argument for, obviously our clear cut wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lambs, I just don't feel like there's any regression. I feel like there's just going to be more progression in upward tick.
Absolutely. And going back to our, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill discussion, I said it. I personally do believe, I really always have since the Chiefs days, that Tyreek Hill is just the best player in the NFL, the most impactful player, at least impact wise. Who would you be scared of the most as a coordinator to game plan against? I think it has to be Tyreek Hill. I think he's the hardest to guard. He's impossible, probably the hardest to guard in NFL history, honestly, other than maybe Megatron or Jerry Rice. So he is that guy. But, good transition into our wide receiver 1 because I do want to just give a few points on why I have CD over Tyreek. I think this is a relevant discussion. A lot of people have been having this discussion, and we've already kind of got into it a little bit. But, at the same time, Tyreek Hill has Jalen Waddle on the other side of him when CeeDee Lamb has wide receiver 2 is Brandon Cooks. I think that is something to keep in mind. He has to be the focal point, like the only focal point of the offense. And he's also 25 this year, and Tyreek Hill is 30. So, history data would tell you to bet on the 25-year-old when it's, this close. And CeeDee Lamb had 23.7 points per game last year. The only person to have more than Tyreek Hill, which sounds insane. I just read off his stats last year. I mean, Tyreek Hill had incredible stats, but 135 catches for CeeDee last year, 100 or 1,749 yards, 12 touchdowns, 403 fantasy points, and the wide receiver one last year. So wide receiver one last year, wide receiver one for us this year, wide receiver one for me, you, NFL seekers, consensus. Being drafted as a wide receiver one, rightfully so. I do think he finishes is the same as last year. Maybe not 400 points, but he will get upwards of 330, 350 fantasy points. And in this situation where he has to be the focal point, you don't really have receiving weapons on this team, if I'm being honest. Like, you got Jake Ferguson as your second best receiving option. So yeah, it's just going to be a lot of attacking Ceedee, Dak attacking Ceedee. We saw it last year. They both were like MVP candidates damn near. So I think they continue that run. I think they have a great season. I think Ceedee's wide receiver one, probably gets 10 plus touchdowns, 120 plus catches, maybe 1,600 yards. I think he really is that guy with the crown.
He's gonna get fed, man. It's obvious this offense needs him. They rely on him. 12 out of the 17 games he played last season, he had over 10 receptions. You just crown him, man. I mean, it's hard to it is hard. I mean, like I said, you can pick your poison with any of these guys. It's hard for wide receivers to produce back to back fantasy wide receiver one seasons. And so if history tells you, whoever the fantasy wide receiver one is probably won't be next year. But if we're going off of, who has the safest bet, it's going to be Ceedee Lamb. I mean, the target share is ridiculous. Like you said, he's got Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert behind him. So there's absolutely no competition for those targets. And Dak has just always hyper fed him. I mean, it's been a consistency year in and year out. And, he's an incredible football player. If I'm going off of my, I think it's Justin Jefferson is the most complete receiver, and I think Ceedee Lamb is, the second most complete receiver in the NFL. But he just has a quarterback that can get him the ball, and he's going to get that target share over anyone. So it's just the most clear cut path to me. I mean, I don't even know, man. I'm fumbling my words because it's Ceedee Lamb. It really is. It's just clear as day.
I mean, you said it perfectly when it regards to the player himself as well. He probably is the player that needs to be compared to Justin Jefferson the most. He's probably the player that's right there with him as the best, young receiver coming up in the NFL. And he's not really in those discussions as much as you would think. Let me just read his stats after the bye week last week. Week 8, 41 fantasy points. Week 9, 28.1 fantasy points. Next week, 39.5, 16.5, 17.3. 32.6, 19.1, 18.6, 25.2, 40.2, and 35.5. So those last 3 weeks literally won you your league if you had Ceedee on your team. If you had a Dak Ceedee stack on your team, you won your league with the last 3 weeks getting 25, 40, and 35 from Ceedee. So that is insane projection. He comes through when you need him. He'll have those big boom weeks. They literally do just target him. He's their whole focal point of the offense. So he's going to put up big boom numbers. He's just going to pad his stats all year. It'll be the same as last year. I think he'll have a shout for offensive player of the year in the real NFL too. I think he'll kind of boost his name value up there even more, being in there in Dallas. So I love the player. Anything else you want to say on him? Anything else you want to say on any of these receivers?
I like you calling your shot there, Dan. What bold take? I'll say it because screw it, because I'm gonna say, don't be scared to draft Amon-Ra St. Brown as your wide receiver one. I'm gonna say it. I bold prediction: Amon-Ra St. Brown finishes wide receiver one at the end of this year.
Yeah, not gonna lie, that's very fair. That's the safest hot take you could take, honestly, because Amon-Ra, he could definitely do that with the PPR, with the targets. He could have the most targets. If he honestly, like, he didn't have the most touchdowns last year. If he could definitely, we didn't even talk about this, he could definitely boost those touchdowns. He could have a huge positive progression with the touchdowns that didn't really go his way last year because all the rookies were hauling in all the touchdowns. So there is some room for a huge year for Amon-Ra. He'll pay off the value. We're just talking about Amon-Ra some more because he's so fun. All these receivers are freaks. They're all awesome. You got to kind of call your shot at the top of your draft because all these guys we talked about today are being drafted in the first 2 rounds of your fantasy drafts, which is pretty crazy to say in a top 10 receiver ranking episode. That's just how fantasy is going nowadays. But thank you guys for tuning in to another fantasy football ranking episode. We got one more of these in as the tight ends before we get into some deep dive content. We'll have some more fantasy content, our favorite fantasy sleepers will definitely get out soon. I'm excited for that one. So we'll come up with some more fantasy content, our final rankings in a few months. So thank you guys for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe for the algorithm, and peace out.
Peace.